Oh man, we are back. First things first, I want to apologize for not uploading for like 7-8 days about. After finishing second in the Grand Challenge, I just wanted to take a break from Pokemon for a little bit because Regulation H is obviously like coming to a close, Reg G's coming up, and then the other thing is with Christmas right around the corner, everyone at my job right now is scrambling to get stuff done last minute, including myself. So, yeah, so I'm sorry about not posting a video in a few days. However, the thing is, I held a poll recently where I asked you guys what you wanted the next video to be, and you guys said how to get better at VGC. The thing that I just want to point out is that in order to get better at VGC, it's not necessarily like one particular thing or one particular area that's going to make you better overall. It's many like very tiny things done extremely well to eventually improve your game and then to build a better knowledge and just to get better all around as a player. I think one of the most important aspects is like obviously the history of the game, which we're going to really get into today. However, the thing is, in order to kind of break this down in a way that I like it, I'm going to probably break down these videos into 3 separate parts or 2 separate parts, depending on kind of time constraints and so on, because I think in order to get better at the game, it can really be broken down into 3 areas where it's understanding the history of the game, how to like practice and play games and team build, something like that. I pair all those together. And then the last thing is surrounding yourself with like the right people and then friends in order to get better. However, with that being said, I think understanding the history of the game, it's kind of neglected a lot by a lot of players because I think the attitude is like, oh man, like if you're in a new format, it's like totally brand new. The mechanics might be new. The Pokemon may be new. So it's like, oh, well, just look at this format and don't even bother looking at stuff that happened in the past, where I think it's actually really important to look at the past because you can learn a lot from it. So how this is going to work essentially is we're going to look at teams from just world championships over the years. We're going to start at the most recent one in 2024 and then work backwards, just because obviously like if I started speaking about worlds in like 2015 or whatever, then you guys may not know what I'm talking about, especially for the new players, and that's totally okay. Everyone starts somewhere, so yeah. So we're going to kind of reverse engineer this and speak about teams from now, move backwards, and then just compare and contrast, and then show you guys certain trends that have just stayed consistently good over the years. Now, is that to say that, like, if something worked in the past, like, for example, if, like, weakness policy proc, which, by the way, is going to be mentioned later in the video, if that worked in the past, does that mean it's going to work right now in this moment? No, it has to be chosen at a very specific point in time in a metagame and a format. But yeah, I think it is really a neglected aspect, and I really want to talk about it in this video. So we're going to speak about the World Championships that happened this year, 2024. The team that won was obviously Luca Ceribelli's team. He's a player from Italy, and his team consisted of like Miraidon, Ogerpon, Urshifu, Iron Hands, Whimsicott, and Farigiraf. The thing about his team is I want to particularly focus on the Whimsicott and the Miraidon because this is actually very similar to a core that won Worlds all the way back in 2017. But before we speak about that, let's speak how this core kind of worked. So obviously, like with Whimsicott, the point of it was to essentially set up Tailwind to make Miraidon faster and everything, and then Miraidon was meant to do a lot of damage with choice specs and with its ability Hadron Engine, which obviously set up electric terrain, and then it got like fairy coverage, electric coverage, and then it had Draco Meteor as like the last move for stab. So this is obviously very similar to the team that won Worlds all the way back in 2017, being Ryota Otsuba's team. He was a player from Japan, excellent player. In my opinion, like one of the probably 10 greatest players ever in the history of the game. But as you can see, his team had a Whimsicott and it had a Tapu Koko. So Whimsicott obviously had Tailwind. It was meant to kind of support the Tapu Koko. And Tapu Koko, just like Luca's Miraidon, it essentially was meant to do a lot of damage. It would set up electric terrain. It had Life Orb to boost its damage output. And then it had an electric move and then a fairy coverage move. It obviously didn't have access to dragon moves, at least none that I'm aware of. So obviously, Ryoto decided to kind of forego that. But again, these two teams were, 7 years apart from each other, and then there still is a very similar concept on both teams that ended up helping this individual win the World Championship. Obviously, like, their amazing play helped as well, and the fact that, like, Luca's a great player and Ryota's a great player as well. But yeah, as you can see, these trends have stayed consistent over the years. Going to Worlds 2023, Shohei Kimura won this World Championship. To give you guys a little bit of context, this World Championship was a little bit strange because I think it was like a month or two before the World Championships. What happened was that the format was just changed all of a sudden, and no one was aware that it was going to happen, and they were just like, yep, the format's changed. So then people were kind of like scrambling to make a team, and then eventually Shohei kind of came across this team, which was very standard, but with the lack of time that people had to kind of prepare for the World Championships, you weren't going to necessarily see like this super creative team, I think, go out and win the whole thing. So Shohei, he made the really smart choice of just sticking with a very standard balanced team, and it obviously, like, it was really a big deal because it won him the World Championship. Also, that is paired with his amazing play, and that obviously is the making of a world champion right there. But the thing that I really want to look at on this team is particularly the Landorus, the Amoonguss, and the Iron Hands. So I want to just ignore the Chen Pao, Flutterman, and Urshifu for a sec. I want to just look at these three. So the Amoonguss, Iron Hands, and Landorus. If you go all the way back to the year 2015, Shoma Honami, who's also another player from Japan, another really amazing player and one of the best of all time to do it, he had a very similar concept where his team had Landorus, Amoonguss, and then Kangaskhan. The Kangaskhan obviously was eventually Iron Hands on Shohei's team, but how this team essentially worked was like Amoonguss was meant to kind of put things to sleep and then just redirect away moves. Landorus is obviously just like a really strong Pokemon. You could kind of abuse its Intimidate ability, where if you go back to Shoma's team, he also would abuse the Intimidate ability with Landorus, where he would essentially like switch it in and out. He didn't have U-turn like Shohei did, but even then he still was able to abuse the pivoting in and out with obviously like Landorus' ability. So, but the thing is, obviously like Amoonguss and Landorus, they've consistently stayed good over the course of many years. As you can see, like it won Worlds relatively recently, only like a year ago. But let's look at the Iron Hands and Kangaskhan. So Iron Hands essentially fit the same idea as Kangaskhan, where it had access to Fake Out like Mega Kangaskhan did, and it was just like this really bulky Pokemon that could output a lot of damage, just also like Mega Kangaskhan. So even though, again, they both were many years apart from each other, obviously the same ideas and similar concepts have ended up winning the World Championships not all that long ago. Going on to Worlds 2022, this is Eduardo's team that ended up winning. In particular, I want to look more so at the Gastrodon, Rillaboom, and Incineroar. This concept of like the Fire, Water, Grass core, it actually won Worlds all the way back in 2018 on Paul Ruiz's team. So if you look at his team, instead of like the Rillaboom, he had Kartana, but he also had the Gastrodon and Incineroar core. So essentially, like, you guys know how Incineroar works, but let's look particularly at the Kartana and at the Rillaboom. The idea of those two Pokemon was like, they both were really strong physical attacking grass types, where Rillaboom had access to Grassy Glide. And keep in mind, during this generation in Sword and Shield, Grassy Glide, its base power, I think, was base 70 rather than the base power it is now, whatever it is now, I kind of forget. But essentially, it was this very strong physical attacking grass type that could outspeed other stuff just because Grassy Glide has priority, where Kartana, all the way back in 2018, although it didn't have priority moves, its base speed was like 109, which, like, obviously you look at that base speed now, you're like, oh, that's not a lot, but for 2018 standards, that was actually really fast. And then Kartana was able to output a lot of damage with Grassium Z and Leaf Blade, and it could just outspeed a lot of stuff. I know Paul Ruiz, he ran his Kartana a little bit bulkier, but even then, it still was able to outspeed like key threats in the meta. Between Paul's team and Eduardo's team, obviously like their Gastrodons are a little different. Paul's team, his Gastrodon was actually more offensive with Groundium Z, but both Gastrodons had Earth Power. Both of them had access to an Ice move, where Paul had access to Ice Beam, and then Eduardo had access to Icy Wind, which was a bit more supportive. And then obviously they both had access to an ability to recover HP, where Paul Ruiz ran the move Recover, where Eduardo actually ran, if I could find it, he ran Leftovers to kind of recover health over time, plus paired with Rillaboom's Grassy Surge that made Gastrodon really, really tough to take down. And then obviously his Gastrodon had Yawn for support. But again, 4 years apart from each other, and even then these two teams had very similar concepts on it with the Incineroar and Gastrodon, and then just a really strong physical attacking grass type. So let's go on to the next thing. So you guys may be looking at this and it's like, wait a minute, this is not any World Championship that I know of. To give you all context, back in the years 2020 and 2021, obviously like COVID-19 was happening, so like everything was shut down, so real life events weren't happening and so on and so forth. So what the Pokemon Company did is that they had Players Cup instead, where it kind of replaced like NAIC and EUIC in those events. And essentially like people played online, and then eventually this guy ended up winning, Centino Tarquinio. I think there was like 4 Player Cups, if I'm not mistaken, that happened, but I don't really remember. However, if you look at his team, essentially the idea of this team and how it worked was you would click a water type move into Colossal. Now some of you might be saying like, wait a minute, Colossal is 4 times weak to a water move, wouldn't that just KO? Keep in mind, this was the era of Pokemon when Dynamax was a thing. Essentially how it worked is like a Pokemon would Dynamax and then its HP would be doubled, and then also its moves would be like supercharged. So it was really tough to take down this Pokemon. It was, in my opinion, the worst mechanic ever added to the game in the history of it. But this is not a video about opinions. It's just that I'm traumatized by Dynamax. It was an awful mechanic. But how this team essentially worked is like, you would click Surf with Dragapult, or you would click Aqua Jet with Urshifu into the Colossal, and you'll Gigantamax with Colossal, and then you would activate its weakness policy, increasing its damage output a lot more, and plus it had the ability Steam Engine, so if it was hit with a Water-type move, then its speed would be actually maxed out to +6. So you would outspeed everything else on the opposing team, you would do a lot of damage, and it was just like a nightmare to deal with. But if you look at this concept, it actually was very similar to a concept all the way back in 2017. It wasn't the team that ended up winning Worlds. It was actually the team that finished 4th, which is Tomoyuki Yoshimura's team. He was also another player from Japan. He's another great player as well. And in my opinion, I thought he actually had the best constructed team at the 2017 World Championships, even though he didn't win. But this team was like very just well thought out and well constructed. So yeah, but he had a very similar idea where his Salamence and Metagross essentially fit the same role as like Dragapult and Colossal, where Salamence would go, click Bulldoze, and then with Metagross, it would activate Metagross's weakness policy. However, keep in mind, Metagross has the ability Clear Body, so even if it was hit with Bulldoze, its speed would not be lowered, but the Pokemon on the opposing team would have their speed lowered, so then Metagross would outspeed everything, and then just KO it with like these really strong moves like Zen Headbutt and Hammer Arm. Most of the time, Tomoyuki just would click Zen Headbutt or Bullet Punch, but Hammer Arm was kind of used more so as like a counter to opposing Trick Room teams, or to pair nicely with his own Trick Room user in Nihilego. But yeah, again, these two concepts were years apart from each other, and even then, they ended up actually like doing super well. So yeah, but those are like some of the teams and some of the ideas over the course of many years from just VGC and as like a competitive game and so on and so forth. Are these like the only concepts and only cores that you should be using? No. I just only pointed out a couple just to like make it a little bit more digestible, but there's like way more cores out there that like obviously I didn't touch upon, like Rain cores and Sun teams and then hard Trick Room teams and so on and so forth. But I think what you should do is go back, look at like prior World Championships, and not even just prior World Championships, but also look back at like international championships and online events and prior regionals and so on and so forth, and try to find stuff that you might like from the past that could help you shape ideas and concepts that you're going to use now. And then the other thing is there's also a lot of great resources that were used back in the day. Like go back on YouTube and search up like videos from 2012 of the World Championships or 2013, and even go to like old websites such as Nugget Bridge, which some people may not even know what that is. I think the website got corrupted, but if I could find it, then I'll actually put it in the link in this video. But yeah, I think it is really, really important to understand the history of the game, because it helps you just develop a good general knowledge of how the game functions and works, and then it will help you understand how, you know, a metagame might develop or shift or change, and then just things to look out for when you go and play certain opponents. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got for you guys today. I hope you all have a great day. I think the next part of this video will probably come out like in a week from now. But yeah, so I hope you all enjoy yourselves, and I will see you all next time.